Welcome back to Trust Your Eyes. The 2024 AFL season ended with the Brisbane Lions the premiers. Their emphatic 60-point win over Sydney marked their first premiership in 21 years. They dominated and broke the game apart in a 14-minute second quarter blitz where they scored 40 points and the Swans scored just one. In this period of time, what changed in the game that helped Brisbane gain control? Well, a lot of these big finals are decided in the midfield, and I think that's where Brisbane got started. I mean, it was clearly Lachie Neale and Will Ashcroft, especially in that second quarter, who just completely took over the game with their quick handballs and clearances. They stayed on their feet a lot when Sydney players were falling over and fumbling, and they were just so much cleaner. I think that's where a lot of the difference in the entire game was, but especially in the second quarter. And when Sydney had the ball in this period of time and in the first quarter, I mean, how many times did they just dump kick it forward? Even when they had space. I remember in the first quarter, Chad Warner got into some open territory, a couple bounces, and just hack kicks it forward right to Harris Andrews, and that summarised their entire game, really. And the other thing in the first and second quarters was their marking. I think they took 82 marks in the first half. We know if Brisbane get to 100, they basically win every game. So that was obviously way too much. I think Sydney couldn't apply pressure because of that. It got them tired as well from just chasing and trying to defend Brisbane's uncontested marks. But I think if we factor in all those things, that's why in that second quarter blitz, where they kicked 6 goals in a row, that's how they got all that momentum. Chirs Fagan is now a premiership coach. He's the oldest grand final winning coach in history. And another important fact is that he never played at the AFL level. Does this grand final cement his legacy in the AFL? The simple answer is yes, and Chirs Fagan is a really unique coach himself and has had a really unique journey, but because of Saturday, he's now in the top tier of coaches. He has to be. Once you win a premiership, you're in that elite level for history, and I think he deserves it. It's a great story coming from Tasmania, playing in the Tasmania leagues. He had a lot of success there. I think he was a pretty good player. Then he got his chance at Melbourne as an assistant under Daniher. Then goes to Hawthorn, does fantastic work there with Alistair Clarkson. And now at Brisbane, we've seen the change around in the club's fortune, mainly because of him. He's a big part, and they finally get the grand final. But is Fagan tactically a great coach? Does he know the game really well, like maybe some other coaches? I'm not sure, but what I do know is that in terms of management, man management, he might be the best in the AFL. This grand final was one on trust and the connection. It just was. You don't come back from 44 points down and 25 points down if you don't have that. So he's done really well in that space, giving the players belief. It's funny, we talk a lot about how tactical coaches are, like Chris Scott, and how they can manipulate the game to get it on their terms, but we don't talk about building a team that wants to play together and a club that is on the same page. And Chirs Fagan's done that. It took them 8 years to get to this point, but through his journey, everything he's learnt, it's been a fantastic job, a great journey, and Chirs Fagan is now a premiership coach. Before we get to the Norm Smith medalist, let's turn our attention to Sydney. It was another horror grand final performance and a fourth straight loss in the big game. For John Longmire, what does this defeat do to the way you view him as a coach and his own legacy? I still think in all these situations and the bad grand final losses, majority of the blame is on the players, but one of the consistent parts in all of these grand final teams is the coach John Longmire. So for me, it diminishes his reputation by maybe 10 to 15%. This is hard to explain that 3 out of the 4 grand final losses have been such big blowouts from a club that from the outside is so professional, the Bloods culture, it's well run, and all those things are true, and that's why I think it's really surprising and shocking. Tactically, did they get things right? I'm not sure. The selection of Logan McDonald and not picking captain Callum Mills, all these things will be discussed, but the players on the field just had a bad day, and maybe John Longmire did as well. And I think what this does is places a bit of pressure on him for next year. He's out of contract. Who knows about Tasmania, maybe another club. Dean Cox is there in the wings to take over. So I think next year, for maybe the first time in his career, Longmire will have a bit of outside noise about his future. Is it fair enough? Maybe. Again, they've been such a successful club, but one premiership under his reign does feel one or two short, really, and it was a really bad performance. It was another heavy loss, 60 points. But I do think Sydney can bounce back. But when they get to this next grand final, the pressure of it being, a fifth loss in a row and the expectations around their performance, it could really hurt them in the future. But we'll just have to wait and see. But Longmire is still a great coach, but it is going to be an unfortunate memory of his time at Sydney if they can't get a second premiership. Will Ashcroft officially announced himself as a superstar. He's the second youngest Norm Smith medalist in VFL-AFL history, thanks to a 30 disposal and 1 goal game. Out of 10, how impressed were you by the 20-year-old's performance? If I could, I would give him 1,000 out of 10, if that was even possible. But I was just in awe. I really was watching of how good he was. The poise he showed in traffic, out of traffic. I mean, early on he was getting handball receives, 1-2s, looking so clean and confident and so steady with the ball where, the Sydney players were hack-kicking it, giving the ball away easily, not winning the contest. He did all of those things and to a really high level. He was just thoughtful with the ball, took care of it like it was important, which it is. And again, just that comparison with some of those Sydney players, it was stark. And they're just 20 years old and 30 games in. It's astonishing. Plays like a 300-game player to me. And the way he spoke after the game matched that of a veteran player who's been in the AFL system for 10 to 15 years. Just to his kind of build himself. He's not a big midfielder. He's not overly fast, but he's just so steady in his running patterns. I was watching him closely in that last quarter. He knows where to run, where to get the handball receives, where to get those easy marks to start those attacking chains. He's so intelligent with the ball, like Nick Dacos in that way where they stay so balanced and so upright. It was a joy to watch. He is a superstar now in my eyes, and you think this will probably be the first accolade of a whole lot in what's going to be a very long career. Another big talking point in the build-up to the game was Joe Daniher. He kicked 2 goals and was great as the backup ruckman for Brisbane. Do you think he will retire in the coming days or weeks? Well, my answer is yes, and I think his second goal celebration, which was one of the last goals of the game, if not the last one, showed a lot. All his teammates came over to him. He had a big smile on his face. He's not a huge celebrator, Joe Daniher, but to me that was an expression of I've done my job here and I can go home. And over these last few final series, he's really announced himself as a big-time player and a clutch player. And for legacy, if he was to retire, then that's really how he would be remembered. I think kind of 2021, he was to have stopped playing then. I think people would have said he was a good player, not a great one. A little bit goofy, can muck up some chances, but can also kick a bag, where if he was to retire now, I think people would say he was a great player, admire him, especially the job he did as a second ruck at stages through his time at Brisbane. And he would be remembered as a clutch finals player, and you can't be remembered for much better things than that. So this allows him to finish on a high as a premiership player. Been a great pickup for Brisbane, really important. And he should be able to sail into the sunset. And I think all AFL opposition fans will be happy because he's a tremendous player and has had a very good career. With big Oscar McInerney out, Darcy Fort did a great job in the ruck. Many Brisbane players and their coach, after and before the game, declared they wanted grand final medals for the whole squad. Do you agree with this, or should medals only be given for the 23 on the day? Well, for the concept, I do mostly agree, but I'd probably make a few tweaks. I'm not sure if the whole squad, or 43, 44 or 45 players, should get a medal. I'm not sure about that, but say if you've played 5 games for the year or some sort of cut-off, maybe a quarter of the games, then you are eligible for a medal. Or something that I don't mind, it might be a bit too American for you, that's okay, but keep the medals for the people who played on the day, and maybe give the squad and the staff, like the assistant coaches and the coach, a ring or something like that, or even something like a bracelet to recognise their contribution. I think I like those options, but I do agree with a lot of those Brisbane players and Chirs Fagan that the competition does have to do something to recognise everyone, because a lot of these premierships are one with a squad and not just the players who played on the day. To finish off on the grand final discussion, what do you see both sides doing this off-season, and where do they fit in the AFL landscape for 2025? Well, clearly Brisbane's well set up. They'll get Levi Ashcroft and another academy player that's, I think, inside the top 20 or 30 picks as well. Now, if they do lose Joe Daniher, which people are expecting, I'm not sure how they fill that hole. He's their best key forward and a really good option as a second ruck. I think he's really done that role incredibly well this year and has been really important in that part of the game. So that's the big question mark, but the rest of their team is coming into their prime or are in their prime, and I think a lot of their veterans like Zorko and Lester are still playing good enough to play for another couple seasons. Now for Sydney, I trust them. I believe in them that they are a good club. They normally bounce back well, and I think they will. Similar thing, a lot of their core players are at a good age, still young and developing. But unlike Brisbane, I think there are clear areas which they need. Maybe another small forward, kind of a dynamic forward, possibly a guy like Jake Stringer. And then they need their key forwards to develop or try to get another one in, which is unlikely. So they need a Marty and McDonald to get going next year. And a second key defender I think is important. You know, Rampy's coming closer to the end. Tom McCartan struggled in the grand final, but he's their best key back. So that's another area they need. But again, they finished first this year, so they did a lot right. And I think they're set up pretty well to have another good year in 2025. Thanks for listening to Trust Your Eyes for the 2024 Grand Final. I hope you enjoyed the season, and I'll be back soon.